The beautiful crystal towers of New Haven shook violently as massive explosions rocked the peaceful alien city. Elder Veltar, a tall blue creature with see-through skin, stumbled toward the emergency communication panel. His 4 long fingers trembled as he pressed the buttons. He had never been so scared in his long life. The attack had started 3 hours ago without any warning. Giant black ships had appeared in their sky, immediately opening fire on their cities. Had tried to communicate to ask what they wanted, but the attackers had only responded with more weapons fire. "This is New Haven Colony calling anyone who can hear us." Veltar spoke into the transmitter, his voice shaking. "We are being attacked by ships from the Vorthan Empire. All our defenses are destroyed. We have no weapons to fight back. Please, if anyone receives this message, we desperately need help." Around him, other Zephyrians ran through the corridors in panic. Their graceful, bird-like movements looked clumsy now as fear took over. Through the crystal windows, Veltar could see their beautiful gardens burning. The healing centers, where they had spent centuries perfecting their medical knowledge, were now smoking ruins. The Zephyrians had never understood war. For over 2,000 years, their society had focused on growing things, healing the sick, and creating beauty. They had no armies, no weapons, no idea how to fight back against the brutal creatures destroying their world. Their technology was advanced, but it was built for creation, not destruction. Elder Veltar called out his assistant Morden, rushing up to him. "The southern continent is under heavy attack. The Vorthons are landing ground troops there. Not just bombing us, they're invading." Veltar closed his large, gentle eyes. He had heard stories about the Vorthon Empire from other peaceful species. They were conquerors who took what they wanted and destroyed everything else. But he had never imagined they would come to New Haven. What could his people possibly have that was worth this violence? Meanwhile, thousands of light years away in a completely different part of the galaxy, Lieutenant Jake Morrison was having what he thought would be another boring night shift. The young officer sat at his monitoring station aboard Earth Defense Station Omega-7. Drinking his 5th cup of coffee and listening to the usual space chatter, cargo ships reporting their positions, patrol vessels checking in, mining operations, asking for weather updates, then something different came through his headphones. The sound was strange, like music mixed with wind chimes, but the universal translator was working hard to convert it into English. As the words became clear, Jake sat up straight in his chair. "Commander Reynolds," Jake shouted across the busy control room. "You need to hear this right now." Commander Beth Reynolds looked up from the tactical display she was studying. At 42 years old, she had short brown hair streaked with gray and the kind of steady eyes that came from seeing too much combat. She had fought in the brutal Mars Rebellion when colonists there tried to break away from Earth. She had also commanded troops during the Europa mining wars, where corporate armies had battled over ice mining rights. Beth walked quickly across the metal floor of the command center, her military boots making sharp sounds with each step. "What have you got, Morrison?" Jake played back the transmission. As the desperate alien voice filled the air around them, several other officers stopped their work to listen. The universal translator struggled with some words, but the meaning was terrifyingly clear. "My God," whispered Ensign David Clark from the communication station. "Those are real aliens, and someone's trying to wipe them out." Beth's jaw tightened as she listened to the fear in Veltar's voice. She had heard that same desperate tone from human civilians during wartime. Fear was universal, apparently. "Navigation, what's our distance to these coordinates?" she asked Lieutenant Kevin Torres, who quickly ran the numbers on his computer. "Out. 18 hours at maximum speed, Commander. But we'd need Admiral Thompson's permission to leave our patrol zone." Beth looked around at her crew. These were good people, trained to protect others. She could see in their faces that they wanted to help, regulations or not. "Get me a direct line to Admiral Thompson immediately," she ordered, "and prep our fastest ship for possible deployment." "Ma'am, shouldn't we wait for official orders from Earth Command?" asked Torres. Beth shook her head. "Lieutenant, I've been in enough wars to know what genocide sounds like. Those aliens are dying while we talk about paperwork." As the crew scrambled to establish contact with their superior, the alien distress call continued to play on repeat. Each time, Veltar's voice seemed more desperate, more hopeless. In the background, he could hear explosions and the sounds of his civilization being destroyed. Beth stared out the observation window at the stars, her mind already planning. Somewhere out there, peaceful creatures were being murdered by an empire they had never heard of. Every minute they delayed meant more innocent deaths. The commander had spent her entire military career protecting people. She wasn't about to stop now just because these particular people happened to have blue skin and 4 fingers instead of 2. Admiral Robert Thompson stood in the middle of Earth Command's main war room, a massive underground facility buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The room was filled with glowing displays showing star maps, fleet positions, and tactical information from across human space. At 61 years old, Thompson had seen more combat than most people could imagine. His face was weathered from years of service, with deep lines around his eyes and gray hair that had once been black. The alien distress call played again through the room's speakers. Every time Thompson heard it, the desperation in the alien's voice made his stomach tighten. He had heard similar pleas during his own military career, civilians begging for help as their cities burned around them. "Play it one more time," he ordered his communications officer as Veltar's translated words filled the room again. Thompson watched his staff officers carefully. These were experienced military professionals who had served in conflicts across the solar system. He could see the anger building in their eyes. Humans had a particular hatred for bullies who picked on the defenseless. Colonel Maria Santos stepped forward from her position at the intelligence station. She was Earth's top expert on alien warfare, though until now, that had been mostly theoretical since humans had never encountered hostile alien species before. Maria had spent years studying the few peaceful alien contacts they had made, trying to understand how different species might fight. "Sir, we've confirmed that the Galactic Council received the same distress signal about 20 minutes ago," she reported, checking her datapad. "But their response system is incredibly slow. They have to form committees, review diplomatic procedures, check territorial boundaries, and get approval from dozens of different species before they can act." Thompson shook his head in disgust. "How long are we talking about, Colonel?" "Best case scenario? 6 standard days. But it could be longer if there are political complications." 6 days, Thompson repeated slowly, his voice growing harder. He had seen what modern weapons could do to undefended cities. 6 days was an eternity in military terms. "Those blue-skinned people will all be dead by then." The Admiral turned to his aide, Captain William Johnson, a younger officer who had served with distinction during the asteroid belt conflicts. "Captain, send immediate orders to Admiral Foster with the 3rd Fleet. I want full combat deployment within 2 hours." Captain Johnson looked uncertain. "We don't have any intelligence on these Vorthins. We don't know how many ships they have, what kind of weapons they're using, or what their tactical capabilities are. Shouldn't we gather more information?" First, Thompson's eyes flashed with controlled anger. "Captain, they're attacking civilians who can't fight back. That's all the intelligence I need." His voice carried the weight of authority that came from commanding troops in every major human war of the past 20 years. "We respond to distress calls. Period. It's what makes us different from the monsters who prey on the innocent." The room fell silent for a moment. Everyone present understood what the Admiral meant. Humanity had crawled up from a world that constantly tried to kill them. They had fought wars against their own environment, against deadly weather, dangerous animals, and natural disasters that would have wiped out weaker species. That struggle had made them tough, but it had also taught them to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Within minutes, orders were flying out to military bases across the solar system. The 3rd Fleet, which had been conducting training exercises near Jupiter, immediately began preparing for combat deployment. Supply ships rushed to load ammunition, medical supplies, and spare parts. Ground troops packed their gear and prepared. For possible planetary assault operations, Captain Alex Parker received his orders while standing on the bridge of the dreadnought Vengeance. At 45, Parker was known throughout the fleet as a commander who never left anyone behind. His ship was one of humanity's most powerful warships, It's designed specifically for fighting enemies who might be technologically superior. The Vengeance was over a kilometer long, armored with the strongest materials human science could produce, and armed with enough firepower to level a small moon. "All hands, this is the captain," Parker announced over the ship's intercom system. "We have received a distress call from an alien species under attack by hostile forces. We are departing immediately to render assistance. This is not a drill." Throughout the ship, nearly 3,000 crew members began their pre-combat preparations. In the Marine barracks, Colonel Lisa Chen briefed her troops on what little they knew about the situation. The Marines were humanity's elite ground fighters, trained to operate in any environment from zero gravity to toxic atmospheres. "Listen up," Chen told her assembled troops. "We're going in blind against an unknown enemy to help people we've never met. But that's what we do. That's what humans do." The human fleet that assembled was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. These weren't exploration vessels or peaceful cargo ships. They were weapons of war, built by a species that had learned to fight or die. Every human ship carried enough firepower to destroy cities, and every human soldier was trained for combat that would break the spirits of species that had never known real violence as the three battle groups accelerated toward the New Haven system, their fusion drives burning at maximum power. Admiral Thompson remained in the war room, coordinating the response. He had dispatched over 40 warships and 15,000 Marines to help aliens they had never met against enemies they knew nothing about. Other species in the galaxy would have called it reckless. They would have demanded detailed intelligence reports, diplomatic negotiations, and careful planning. But humans had learned long ago that sometimes you had to act fast to save lives. The message was already spreading through human space. Earth's children were going to war again, not for conquest or resources, but to protect the innocent. It was what they had always done, and what they would always do. The moment Captain Alex Parker's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Haven system, every human officer on every bridge felt their blood turn cold. What they saw through their view screens was a nightmare made real. 17 massive black ships hung in space around the beautiful blue and green planet like vultures circling a dying animal. These Vorthan vessels were sleek and dangerous looking, with sharp edges and dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Bright flashes of energy were constantly firing from their weapons. It's raining down on the planet's surface like deadly lightning. On the planet below, entire cities were burning. The crystalline towers that had taken the Zephyrian centuries to build were collapsing in showers of sparks and debris. What made it even worse was that the attacking ships weren't just bombing military targets, they were deliberately hitting hospitals, schools, and residential areas. This wasn't war. It was systematic murder. Captain Parker stood on the bridge of his flagship, the dreadnought Vengeance, his hands gripping the command rail so tight his knuckles had turned white. At 45 years old, Parker had seen plenty of combat, but nothing had prepared him for watching genocide happen in real time. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Amanda Davis from the sensor station, her voice barely audible. "Sir, I'm reading massive casualties on the surface. The Vorthans aren't just attacking military sites, they're targeting civilian population." Centers. Parker's jaw clenched. During his 20-year military career, he had fought pirates, corporate armies, and rebel forces. But he had never encountered an enemy that deliberately targeted innocents. It went against every rule of warfare that humans followed. "Give me a full tactical readout," he ordered, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the rage building inside him. Lieutenant Davis worked quickly at her console, her fingers flying over the controls. 17 enemy vessels, sir. There! Using some kind of superheated plasma weapons, very effective against unshielded targets. The Vorthon ships don't appear to have energy shields, but they've got thick armor plating. They're positioned in a standard siege formation. Parker studied the tactical display that appeared in front of him. The Vorthon ships were spread out in a pattern that was perfect for bombarding a defenseless planet, but terrible for fighting against an actual military force. It was clear they had never expected anyone to show up and fight back. Communications. Open a channel to the Vorthon Fleet Commander, Parker ordered. The main screen flickered, and then showed the face of an alien that made several human. Officers take a step backward. The Vorthon commander looked like a giant lizard that had learned to walk upright. His skin was covered in dark green scales. His eyes were yellow with vertical pupils like a snake, and his mouth was filled with sharp teeth. When he spoke, his voice was a cold hiss. Unknown vessels. You are interfering with a legitimate territorial expansion ordered by the Vorthon High Command, the alien said, his words dripping with arrogance. Withdraw immediately from this system, or face the consequences of opposing. The Vorthon Empire. Captain Parker stepped forward until he was directly in front of the screen. His face was calm, but every human on the bridge could see the deadly anger in his eyes. I'm Captain Alex Parker of the Human Defense Force, he said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. You have exactly 60 seconds to stop firing on those cities and withdraw all your forces from this system. The Vorthon commanders. Yellow eyes narrowed, and he let out what might have been laughter. Humans, we have never heard of your pathetic species. Look around you, fool. You were outnumbered 17 ships too. 12. 15. You cannot possibly think to challenge the might of the Vorthon Empire. 50 seconds, Parker said calmly, not moving a muscle. The alien's expression changed from amusement to anger. You dare threaten us? We have conquered 47 star systems. We have crushed species far more advanced than whatever backwards world spawned you. We will add your ships to our trophy collection and use your crews as slaves. Parker glanced at the chronometer on his display. 40 seconds. The Vorthon commander began to realize that the human wasn't backing down. His voice became more threatening. This is your final warning.
Ow!
Plasma cannons will melt your primitive ships like ice in a furnace. You cannot comprehend the power of the Vorthon war machine. 30 seconds, Parker replied. Now the alien was beginning to look uncertain. He had expected the humans to retreat when faced with superior numbers, like every other species the Vorthons had encountered. What? What kind of madness is this? No rational species would fight against such odds. 20 seconds. The Vorthon commander tried one more time. We will destroy you, every last ship, every last warrior. Your species will rue the day they decided to oppose the Vorthon Empire. 10 seconds, Parker said. The alien fell silent, staring at the human commander in disbelief. He had never encountered anyone who would calmly count down to their own destruction. Seconds. You're insane. The Vorthon finally shouted. Time's up, Captain Parker said quietly. He reached over and cut the communication channel, the alien's face disappearing from the screen. Parker turned to his weapons officer, Lieutenant Commander Jack Williams, a veteran who had served with him for over 8 years. Williams was already standing at his console, his hands hovering over the firing controls. All ships, Parker announced over the fleet communications system, his voice now carrying the cold fury that every human felt. When watching the innocent being slaughtered, weapons free. Engage all hostile targets. Show these monsters what happens when you pick a fight with Earth's children. Throughout the human fleet, weapon systems that had been charging during the conversation suddenly came online. The Vengeance alone carried enough firepower to level a continent, and it wasn't alone. 43 human warships hung in space, their weapons locked onto Vorthon targets. The Vorthons were about to learn something that no peaceful species in the galaxy had ever had to teach them, that there were some creatures in the universe who would travel across the stars to stop bullies, and those creatures didn't negotiate with genocidal monsters. The moment Captain Parker gave the order to fire, the space around New Haven lit up like the 4th of July. The human fleet unleashed everything they had in one coordinated attack that shook the very fabric of space itself. The first volley of missiles and energy beams slammed into 3 Vorthon cruisers before they could even react. These weren't the careful, measured shots that peaceful species might use in a diplomatic conflict. These were the weapons of a species that had spent centuries learning how to kill efficiently. The Vorthon ships simply ceased to exist, turning into expanding clouds of molten metal and gas. Lieutenant Amanda Davis watched her sensor displays in amazement. "Sir, direct hits on targets 1, 3, and 7. Complete destruction. The remaining Vorthan vessels they're scrambling to reform their battle line." Captain Parker nodded grimly. He had expected this. The Vorthons had been positioned perfectly to bombard helpless civilians. But their formation was completely wrong for fighting against an actual military force. It was like watching a pack of wolves suddenly realize they had cornered a grizzly bear instead of a sheep. "Target the command ship next," Parker ordered. "Let's cut the head off this snake." The Vorthon flagship was easy to spot. It was larger than the others and had been hanging back while the smaller ships did the dirty work. Through the view screen, Parker could see it desperately trying to turn around and present its more heavily armored side to the human weapons. Too little, too late. The Vengeance's main guns fired again, joined by concentrated fire from 2 other human battleships. The Vorthan command ship's armor held for about 3 seconds before the human weapons burned through it like tissue paper. The alien ship broke apart in a series of internal explosions that lit up the dark side of New Haven. "Sir, we're receiving panicked communications from the Vorthan fleet," reported Communications Officer Lieutenant Roy Mitchell. "They're trying to surrender." After what they did to those cities, Parker's voice was ice cold. "I don't think so. Continue firing." But the space battle was only half the story. Down on New Haven's surface, human Marines were preparing to show the Vorthan ground forces what real soldiers looked like. Major Tommy Rodriguez stood in the drop bay of the assault ship Lightning as his Marines made final preparations for combat. At 38 years old, Rodriguez had fought in the brutal urban warfare on Mars and the zero-gravity battles in the asteroid belt. He was a short, stocky man with scars on his face and hands that told the story of a life spent in combat.
"Listen.
Up!" he shouted over the noise of the ship's engines. "Intelligence says there are roughly 2,000 Vorthan ground troops on the surface, spread across 5 major cities. They've been executing civilians for the past 6 hours. We're going to stop them." The Marines around him checked their weapons and armor one final time. These weren't the ceremonial guards that peaceful species might maintain. These were professional killers trained to fight in the worst conditions imaginable. Their powered armor was designed to keep them alive and toxic. Atmospheres, underwater, in space, or in the middle of a nuclear battlefield. "Drop pods launching in 30 seconds, called out the pilot. Rodriguez sealed his helmet and felt the familiar sensation of his armor systems coming online. Targeting displays appeared in his vision. Weapon status indicators showed green across. The board in his suit's computer began analyzing the battlefield data streaming down from the ships in orbit. "Marines, remember, we're here to protect the civilians. But if it's got scales and it's carrying a weapon, put it down hard." The drop pods launched like bullets fired from heaven. Rodriguez felt the crushing acceleration as his pod punched through New Haven's atmosphere at incredible speed. Around him, 200 other pods were making the same descent, each one carrying a human Marine ready for battle. The planet's low gravity was immediately apparent when they hit the ground. What would have been a bone-crushing impact on Earth? It felt more like a hard landing. Rodriguez burst out of his pod and immediately noticed how easy it was to move. The Zephyrians had evolved on this world, and their graceful flowing movements made perfect sense here. But for humans, the low gravity was like having superpowers. "Bravo, squad! Contact front!" shouted Sergeant Linda Hayes over the radio. "Vorthan. Infantry. 200 meters and closing." Rodriguez bounded toward the combat in leaps that would have been impossible on Earth. Each step carried him forward almost 20 feet, and he could jump over obstacles that would have blocked him back. Home. Around him, his Marines were moving like supernatural warriors. Their heavy combat armor, feeling light as air in the reduced gravity, the Vorthan ground troops were in. For the shock of their lives, the aliens had been systematically going through a Zephyrian residential area, dragging families from their crystal homes and executing them in the streets. They were armed with energy weapons that could punch holes through concrete. And they wore armor that had protected them against every enemy they had ever faced. It wasn't enough. Rodriguez came around a corner to see a group of Vorthan soldiers. forcing a family of blue-skinned Zephyrians to kneel in front of what had once been a beautiful garden. The reptilian aliens were clearly enjoying themselves, taking their time with the execution. "Contact front," Rodriguez roared, opening fire. With his assault rifle, the human weapons used old-fashioned bullets instead of energy beams. But these weren't ordinary ammunition. Each round was designed to punch through military-grade armor and then expand inside the target. The Vorthon soldiers didn't even have time to turn around before half their squad was down. The remaining aliens tried to return fire, but the humans were already moving. In the low gravity, Rodriguez and his Marines could leap and dodge like acrobats. They bounded off walls, jumped over cover, and moved in ways that the Vorthons had never seen before. "These aren't like the other species we fought." The Vorthon soldiers screamed in their hissing language, which Rodriguez's translator converted to English. "They move like demons." "Command, this is Ground 1, Rodriguez reported as his team finished clearing the residential block. "Enemy resistance is lighter than expected. These guys have spent so much time bullying civilians that they forgot how to fight real soldiers." All across New Haven's surface, the same scene was playing out. Human Marines were systematically hunting down Vorthon ground forces and wiping them out with ruthless efficiency. The aliens had never faced an enemy that could move so fast, hit so hard, and show so little mercy to those who harmed innocents in orbit. The space battle was going just as badly for the Vorthons. More than half their fleet was already destroyed, and the survivors were desperately trying to escape. But Captain Parker had no intention of letting them go. "Helm, pursue those fleeing ships," he ordered. "Nobody attacks civilians and just walks away." The final Vorthon warship tried desperately to escape into hyperspace, its engines glowing white-hot as the alien crew pushed their technology beyond safe limits. But human missiles are faster than fleeing cowards. The last enemy vessel disappeared. In a brilliant explosion that lit up the night side of New Haven like a second sun, Captain Parker watched from the bridge of the Vengeance as pieces of burning metal tumbled through space, joining the debris field that had once been a proud invasion fleet. In less than 4 hours, 43 human ships had completely destroyed 17 Vorthon vessels and wiped out over 2,000 ground troops. It hadn't even been close to a fair fight. "All enemy vessels destroyed, sir," reported Lieutenant Amanda Davis from her sensor station. "I'm not reading any Vorthon life signs anywhere in the system." Parker nodded but felt no satisfaction. Victory meant nothing when you could still see the smoking ruins of cities on the planet below. The Zephyrians had paid a terrible price before help could arrive. On New Haven's surface, Major Tommy Rodriguez walked through what had once been a beautiful residential district. The crystal buildings were shattered, their walls blackened by plasma fire. But something amazing was happening. Slowly, carefully, blue-skinned figures were emerging from underground shelters and hidden bunkers. The Zephyrians moved with a natural grace that seemed almost like dancing. Even now, when they were terrified and traumatized, they kept their distance. From the human Marines at first, it's clearly unsure whether these new aliens were friends or just different kinds of enemies. Rodriguez removed his helmet, letting the Zephyrians see his face. His features were marked by old scars from previous battles, and his brown eyes held the weariness that came from seeing too much combat. But when he smiled at a group of frightened alien children, his expression was gentle. "It's okay," he said, knowing his universal translator would convert his words. "The bad guys are gone. You're safe now." Elder Veltar approached the human major with slow, uncertain steps. The tall alien's translucent blue skin was pale with shock, and his large eyes kept darting to the human weapons and armor. These creatures had just destroyed an entire invasion force with casual efficiency. What kind of beings were they? "Your people," Veltar began, his musical voice barely above a whisper. "You fight with such terrible intensity. Such focused violence. Are all humans natural warriors?" Rodriguez looked at the elder for a long moment before answering. Around them, his Marines were helping Zephyrian families search through the rubble for belongings and survivors. Sergeant Rosea. Linda Hayes was sharing her emergency rations with a group of alien children. Corporal Mike Foster was using his armor's medical sensors to help locate wounded civilians trapped under debris. "No," Elder Rodriguez said finally. "Most humans aren't soldiers. We're farmers who grow food, teachers who educate children, doctors who heal the sick, engineers who build things, or artists and musicians and scientists." He gestured toward his Marines. Hayes, there was a kindergarten teacher before she enlisted. Foster ran a veterinary clinic. Veltar's confusion was obvious. "Then why do you fight so well? Why do you seem so comfortable with violence?" Rodriguez put his helmet down and sat on a piece of rubble, making himself less intimidating to the tall alien. "When someone threatens innocent people, we don't have a choice. We become whatever we need to be to protect those who can't protect themselves." The Major's radio crackled to life. "Rodriguez, this is Captain Parker. Bring the Zephyrian leadership up to the ship. We need to have a conversation about what happens next." Several hours later, Elder Veltar found himself sitting in the conference room of a human warship, surrounded by the most dangerous-looking beings he had ever encountered. The humans were all shorter than Zephyrians, but built like solid rocks. With scars and calluses that spoke of lives spent in harsh conditions, their ship was clearly built for war. With weapons visible everywhere, and armor plating thick enough to stop anything the galaxy could throw at it. Yet when Admiral Robert Thompson spoke, his voice was kind and respectful. "Elder Veltar first. Let me say how sorry we are for what happened to your people," Thompson said. The 61-year-old admiral had arrived with reinforcements, though the battle had been over before he got there. "We came as fast as we could, but we weren't fast enough to prevent the loss of life." Veltar studied the human commander. Despite his gentle words, Thompson's eyes held a hardness that came from making life-and-death decisions for decades. This was a being who had seen the worst that intelligent life could do to itself. "Admiral Thompson, your people saved us from extinction," Veltar replied, his voice growing stronger. "We can never repay such a debt. But we would like to offer you a formal alliance, our medical knowledge, our agricultural science, our peaceful technologies. All of it is yours. In exchange, we ask only for protection from those who would harm us." Thompson leaned back in his chair, considering the offer. "Elder, let me make something clear. We didn't come here expecting payment or rewards. We came because it was the right thing to do. That's what humans do. We help people who need help." Captain Parker, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "But an alliance does make sense for everyone involved. Your medical technology could save human lives. Our military protection could save Zephyrian lives. It's a fair trade." Over the next few hours, they worked out the details. A small human fleet would remain in the New Haven system as a permanent garrison. Human engineers would help rebuild the destroyed cities. Zephyrian doctors would work with human medics to share medical knowledge. Most importantly, the galaxy would know that New Haven was under human protection. As the meeting ended, Veltar had one final question. "Admiral, there are many species in this galaxy. Most of them are peaceful, but some are aggressive. Will you protect others the way you protected us?" Thompson smiled grimly. "Elder, let me tell you something about humans. We don't like bullies. We never have, and we never will. If someone is picking on people who can't fight back, we'll be there." Word of the Battle of New Haven spread through the galaxy faster than the human ships could travel. On 1,000 different worlds, peaceful species whispered about the mysterious humans who had appeared from nowhere to destroy an entire Vorthan invasion fleet. Some called them Angels of Mercy, others called them Demons of War. The aggressive empires took notice too. Suddenly, expansion plans were reconsidered. Military advisors ran calculations and came to uncomfortable conclusions. If the humans could destroy a Vorthon fleet that easily, what else could they do? 6 months later, Elder Veltar stood in his rebuilt council chamber, watching human patrol ships move across the night sky. The crystal spires of New Haven gleamed again, rebuilt with a combination of Zephyrian artistry and human engineering that made them stronger than ever. For the first time in Zephyrian history, his people slept safely knowing that somewhere out in space, guardians watched over them. These guardians came from a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years, making them harder than diamond and more dangerous than any weapon. But they had also learned something that many warrior species never discovered, that true Strength wasn't about being the biggest or the toughest. True strength was about standing between the innocent and those who would harm them. The message echoed across the galaxy. Earth's children had arrived. And they didn't negotiate with bullies.